Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Live Free, Ride Free. I'm your host, Rupert Isaacson, New York Times bestselling author of The Horse Boy and The Long Ride Home. Before I jump in with today's guest, I want to say a huge thank you to you, our audience, for helping to make this happen. I have a request. If you like what we do here, please give it a thumbs up, like, subscribe, tell a friend. It really, really helps us to make the progress. To find out about our certification courses, online video libraries, books, and other courses, please go to rupertisaacson.com. So now let's jump in. Welcome back to Live Free, Ride Free. I've got Jarod Anderson, the author, with me today, and lots of people have been asking me to get him on the show. Why? Because he writes amazing nature with the imagination stuff. You like cryptids? You like, if you don't know what cryptids are, you kind of will by the end of this. You like real nature, but mixed with your imagination. You maybe are stuck somewhere feeling you can't get into nature, but how does one's imagination take one in there? How do you enter your own private Narnia? I think we've got the bloke here who's got some decent roadmaps to that, and he's been successful at it. So he's someone who has also been able to self-actualize, if you like, through his imagination. And I think there's a lot we can all learn from him in terms of our own attempts to do the same. So Jarod, thank you so much for coming on. Please tell us who you are, what you do, why you do it, and how you got there.
Thanks, Ru. Good to be here. Yeah, so where to begin? So right now I'm a full-time writer out of a small town in Ohio in the US. And how I got here was a bit of a winding trek. I've always loved writing and words and imagination. I have a vivid memory of being 10 years old, and I had a very influential teacher named Miss Woolard. He used to take all of us 10-year-olds and herd us out behind the school and let us go into the woods. There was a huge hill beside this school that we called the Land Lab. And she would read Mary Oliver poetry to us and then give us notebooks and then say, hey, just go find a place to sit and write about what you see. And I was hooked. So I've written nature poetry and dabbled in nature writing ever since I understood the value of sitting still and letting my imagination meet what I found out in the world. But flash forward from that experience as a 10-year-old, and I was a person who did and still do struggle with chronic major depression. And I grew up in an environment where we really were not encouraged to talk about it. So it was a silent and unacknowledged presence in my life for a very long time. What's that?
Where was that, where you were growing up?
Rural Ohio.
Okay.
So kind of small town.
Stoic wasps. Yeah.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah.
And especially the menfolk were not encouraged to have feelings or talk about them.
No, you're supposed to go and quietly end your life with a shotgun behind the barn. Yeah.
Yes.
And not complain about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, feelings, you can have like anger. That would be okay.
That's
as a
true.
Feeling. But
provided you kick someone's ass.
Yes.
Or silently fume. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So it got a little awkward for me here and there as somebody who once missed football practice because I won a poetry contest and got to the award ceremony. So I think I was always confusing to people because I didn't fit into one camp necessarily. So, because of the mental health issues, because I sort of never learned the skills of addressing them or acknowledging them, which would be the first step to opening the door to getting more help, I really kind of stuffed it down where it could simmer quietly. And sometimes it was more intrusive and sometimes it was less, and I kind of faked my way through building a career. I did a bachelor's in literature and then a master's, and I taught English for a little while.
So you always knew you wanted to write?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as I really understood what it was. And then when I paired that understanding with me as a little kid in the 80s with like a big tape deck, and I would rent these puffy book on tape books from the library.
I remember those.
I'd borrow them, and especially The Hobbit. So it was, under the covers after everybody was asleep. I've always had insomnia, and so I would just be listening to these fantastical stories. And And then when I realized it was a craft, it wasn't just this thing where I could open a portal and see into another world. It was a craft that I could actually bring that to other people and to myself. That was intoxicating from the start. So it took a little while for me to think of it as a possible profession because I had no real role models near me.
Sure, and breaking into writing successfully is not an easy thing.
No, I mean it's really I can't even say it was ever a plan. We'll get to it, but I'm excited to be there now, but I'm always a little bit surprised.
Right. Were
But
you doing everything else along the way, working construction, doing all that kind of thing that one does
yeah.
as a writer to become a writer?
Yeah, and at first I didn't like school. My parents didn't go to college. I tried to go when I was 18 and basically failed out, was put on probation. And looking back on it, it's because I had no idea why I was there. It was that I had other friends that were going, and it seemed like the thing to do. But I got there, and I didn't want to go to class, and I didn't want to get up early, and I didn't want to do anything that felt arbitrary, which doesn't play well with academia. And so I left. I did take jobs in construction and real estate and all over the place. I
Mm.
worked at a factory making rakes once.
I don't want to bang your nose.
What's that?
Did you
Oh
get to
no.
tread on one and bang your nose?
No, these were like the big lawn rakes. So
Got it.
it was getting the plastic heads out of the press and they were hot and you had to like trim the excess. Fun stuff. But then years later, sort of in my mid 20s, I went back and then was a good student because
Mm.
I had some understanding of myself and what I wanted. And I had started dabbling with little night classes at a local college and realized, oh, okay, if I can do this in a way where what I'm doing is talking about books and stories and writing and find a community centered around that, that was what I needed. And so then I really lit up with it. But again, I think going off movies and TV, thought to myself, okay, I need to be a literature professor. That's the respectable gig I can get where I'm allowed to just think about words and stories and books
And
all
actually
day.
pay the rent. Yeah.
Yeah. But after doing the masters and teaching for a few years, I started to understand that like the job was to teach, 100 students a semester, and then you go home and you have these piles of 100 essays written by people who did not want to write them. And I found it that when I did that as my day job, I did not want to write in the evening.
Right.
I was so sick of
Yeah, it
words.
would make you allergic. I could see that.
Yeah, yeah. The last thing I would want to do after finishing my obligation was to sit back down at a computer or open the journal and try to write. So I left academia and did the thing that people who leave academia in English often do, which is I went to marketing and nonprofit work. And I actually ended up on the other side of the desk as an administrator at Ohio University, working as my title was Director of External Relations. So it was marketing and fundraising and PR. It was
Which does involve telling stories. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It was sort of the business side
Hmm.
of being a words guy, a storyteller. But during that time, my mental health issues really came to a head and really got bad. Partly because, I had a director title, which was like I had climbed the ladder to sort of the logical endpoint, and I thought I was sort of staring down the barrel of the next 40 years and thinking, this is it, huh? My job was meetings about other meetings. Theoretically, there was a storytelling component, but that wasn't the day to day. And all of this is happening under the umbrella of this major depression that I just had never done anything about,
Mm.
mostly because of shame. Some part of me understood that there were experts and medical professionals, people who dedicated their lives to support for the sort of mental health issues I was having, but no part of me wanted to talk to those people. And so I blamed it all on the work. And then I found myself in this place of intense privilege where my wife, Leslie, knowing my struggles, just sort of said, hey, quit. we have health insurance through my job. Like, we'll be fine. Quit. Like,
What does she do?
she was also a marketing director. She
Mm.
writes horror novels. And I met her. She was doing a master's in poetry. I met her in grad school. So she she gets it in terms of writing and my relationship with it. And yeah, she just, it was scary. It's not as if we were well off, but she just sort of said, this is, she could see the weight on me from those months and years, and just, she had to talk me into it, really. But I did. I quit. And that really began this process of reconnecting with things I knew when I was younger, like prioritizing time in nature, prioritizing creativity, taking it seriously. And then the scary new stuff, which was I started to talk to people about suicidal ideation. I started to talk about depression. I went to a doctor. I eventually started going to a counselor. And that has made all of the difference for me. But this strange thing happened because I really focused on the mental health aspect first. And I found a medication that kind of helped take the edge off. I found a counselor who I felt like got me. He was this dude with a big gray beard who always disappeared to the Smoky Mountains for vacations. And I could talk to him about, he had the same feeling as I did about being out in the woods. But he kind of got me to understand that all of the stuff I was doing for depression was geared toward bringing me back to neutral, bringing me back to sort of a
Mm.
level playing field. And that's not the same as happiness or contentment as a skill. And there was this odd moment in trying to troubleshoot my own brain, my own point of connection with reality, where I thought, what does make me happy? Where does contentment lie? If the disease is under control, then what? Or so what? And I started to go back to the woods in an intentional way. I grew up with a mother who would take me on nature walks most days, and we were never religious, but she called the woods her church, and we would go and see what was blooming, or we would go gather mushrooms, or find an interesting skull, or it was just sort of a daily thing. And yet, when I was career focused and when I was dealing with all these mental health issues, I started to think that stuff is juvenile, or that it was like locked in a glass case, labeled childhood. And there was this awkward period of reconnection where I would go to the woods and think, I'm doing this wrong. I don't know the names of what I'm looking at. I'm going to fail the quiz when I get back to the parking lot and somebody asks me what species I saw. I don't know what it was, but it was this fear of doing it wrong. It was the kind of capitalist pressure to always be productive that would tell me that there was no way to justify just going to the woods to connect with nature. But I did. I did. And I started to do this little podcast called the Crypto Naturalist, which was me thinking, all right, I want to reconnect with my creativity in a serious way. What would I do if I was just playful and did exactly what I wanted? And I thought, all right, I love nature. I love these single voice nature shows I grew up with. There's Marty Stauffer's Wild America and David Attenborough. There were so many, certainly Steve Irwin. And I was like, I'm going to do that, but I'm going to leave facts out of the room entirely. I'm going to do a love letter to nature and these nature shows, but I'm going to invent everything. I'm going to bring in that fantasy aspect I love from listening to The Hobbit under the covers. So the Crypto Naturalist was this guy who loved nature, but it was cryptids. So things like Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, but I never did any established cryptids. I wanted each episode to introduce people to something entirely new so that they could always have that moment of
Something new that you had
surprise.
invented, or a really obscure cryptid from another culture that they might not have heard of?
It was almost always something I invented entirely. Like, I didn't want to be beholden to any source material.
Give us some examples, please.
Oh, geez. There was one that was the Orbital Kingfisher.
The
which is
orbital
this.
kingfisher. Tell us
Yeah,
about
so
that.
like if you can picture a kingfisher, sort of a diving bird that hovers above ponds and lakes and then dives in to grab a
Mm.
fish. Okay, this was that, but it was in lower orbit. It was this huge bird that was kind of shimmering and looked like it made of fractal pieces, like a prism, and it hovered above the earth and it would dive down into these mountain lakes. And then what it would come up with was sort of an eldritch horror. It would come up with these things that were mostly mouth, and the person seeing it didn't understand how that could work in physical space. So I like these creatures who mirror something in real nature, but are also totally outside it.
Just to tell me again, what did it come out of the lake with?
Something that was like looked like mostly shadow, and it was covered with mouths, and so it
And that was
hunted.
its prey.
Yes, so
And
it
what was the
hunted
name of
other
that species that it
strange.
was after? What was
It
the name of that thing?
didn't have a name.
Okay.
It
A many
hunted
mouth
other
shadow.
things. Yeah, yeah. It hunted
And what
other
do you
like
think the many mouth
inscrutable things.
shadow represents? Is that like, do you think in your subconscious you were thinking about, for example, a almost like a sort of divinity that can take the shit side of human experience out of Earth,
Yeah.
happens to be buried in these lakes. And is that sort of the metaphor for what's going on? And wouldn't it be nice if these divinities came and took these shit sides of our shadow pollution
Yeah.
that we
Yeah,
might
I'll tell you the
something like
meta.
that? Is that what's going on with?
So in this case, there is sort of like a meta narrative where I have these species that are kind of guardians of Earth and different ecosystems, these singular
Got it.
creatures. And so they will hunt things that are kind of an invasive species from outside our reality. And so the whole thing to me is sort of a metaphor for the way nature seeks balance and
Okay.
adapts and sort of takes care of itself.
Nature, including the human psyche, right?
Oh, absolutely.
The balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, in the cosmology, the world of that podcast, there are these guardian creatures that own sort of specific regions and ecosystems. Like there's one for the Appalachian Mountains
Tell me
and
about the Appalachian one.
well, that one is the horned wolf is what I call him. And I can't tell you too much about him because he's a major subject of the novel I have coming out in February,
Horned wolf.
which is just called
What is the name of this novel that's coming out?
Strange Animals,
Strange Animals.
and that's coming from Valentine Books, which
Adds
tick
to reading list immediately. Yes. Says man who
which
spends lots of time on planes. Yeah. Yeah.
well, it's that story is about it's kind of the backstory of the main character in the
Okay, but why did you
podcast.
come up with the horned wolf? What basically does the horned wolf do without, you know, we'll still buy your book, but come on.
Yeah.
What does it do?
He does the same thing that the orbital kingfisher does, but he does it beneath the mountains, the Catskill Mountains, the Appalachian
He goes
Mountains.
under the earth.
Yeah, he essentially looks like the skeleton, like a grizzly bear sized skeleton of a timber wolf, except that he has flesh that is like coalesced shadow, but there's never quite enough of it. So sometimes he will have the face of a wolf with the ears of a wolf and stuff. Sometimes that flesh will roll back and it will be a bear wolf skull.
Why does he never quite have enough shadow flesh? Where's the
Uh,
scarcity there? Why?
Yeah. Yeah, I think what I'm playing with there is if you look at what the mountains are, the Appalachian Mountains that are older than the moon. You
Hmm.
know, they're the
They're older
Appalachian
than the
Range is in
moon.
Scotland and it's in
Hold
the
on, you just said they're
US.
older than the moon.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
We're
They're
gonna have to return to that in a minute. Okay, keep
the
going.
Appalachians were around on Pangea, when there was one continent. And so you can trace where those mountains are in Scotland and in the US
But people
because
assume, I think, that the moon has always been here as a planet, as an offshoot of our planet. So you're gonna have to come back
yeah.
to why the moon is not as
All
old.
right.
All right,
Yeah.
but I'm just gonna hold you to that. I've also got
Okay.
questions about Mary Oliver that we want to go back to. But all right,
Okay.
so the Appalachian Mountains are older than the moon. All right, but why has this creature not quite got enough flesh?
If I think of what the mountains are, I think of all of the sort of inert rock. Um,
Mm.
and yet my nature loving brain sees a kind of life in stone that isn't the same as biological life, but there's still some sort of essential wholeness to the universe that feels like life and sort of spirituality to me in the rocks in the same way that I might sense in a pine tree. And I guess I was pointing out with the horned wolf that rigidity, like I wanted to always see the skeleton, like the scaffolding beneath, because if I'm thinking of a creature that is of the mountains, I like that there's always like the rigid curve of a pelvis or a spine or a skull
Right, like the
showing.
shoulder of the rock showing under the moss or the.
Yes. Yeah. So that shadow, like it is a creature of
Mm.
flesh. It does represent and protect the living things, but it's also of the mountains in a
And what
way
does it
that,
hunt? What does it eat?
oh, so many things. The premise is that, much like in the real world, we struggle with invasive species, sending ecosystems out of balance. In a metaphysical way, I wanted there to be invasive species that were always kind of knocking on the door of reality. And because the Appalachians are so old, I thought like there's a rich pantheon of things from the outside trying to get in. And I'll often talk about it in, sort of an essential otherness to the creatures that are from outside reality and nature that this wolf is always hunting and eating.
So again, or she is trying to secure harmony
Hmm.
because harmony is always being so restoring balance because balance is always being lost, and it's that.
Its balance is always being lost, regained, reimagined,
Mm.
but balance is struck by opposing forces. And so if I'm going to create a fictional world in which there are really serious threats from the outside, then I need a very serious predator guardian pushing back against that force.
Got it.
And all of that, it all arose from that first decision to do exactly what I wanted, which I often find is the most successful creative path of trying to get out of the way of my own enthusiasm and not interrogate it, too much of like, why am I doing this? What's the point? But just thinking, all right, I feel enthusiastic about these nature shows. I feel enthusiastic about
Mm.
mingling the fantastic with the sense of fantastic in the nature I know and love and observe every day. I was,
There is, as you know,
yep.
a sort of philosophy within the philosophy of manifestation to say that you must always follow. When they say follow your passion, it's really follow your excitement. What makes you feel excited? What makes you feel joyful? If you follow that, you'll probably get there because you will keep going. And if you don't, you probably won't because you'll get pissed off and stop.
Oh yeah, that's so true. I've definitely started novels I didn't finish, and
Guilty as
usually it's
charged.
because the kernel of the idea wasn't as exciting as I thought it was.
Luckily,
Uh,
they sometimes get recycled into the later novel that comes. But no, I
oh
agree
yeah,
with you. And just for those of you, by the way, who are busy giving up on your novels, don't worry, lads. We understand.
yes,
But don't assume that's wasted writing at all. It will bear fruit in your next thing. I just want
yeah.
to talk about this moon being older than the Appalachians things because I had to quickly get on Google while you're talking. And of course, it says the moon here is 4.5 billion years old, and it says the Appalachians are approximately 480 million years old. Now, of course, this is just what I
Oh,
just pulled up on Google, so it doesn't mean it's true. But when you say the moon is older than or the Appalachians are older than the moon, what do you mean? Or is that almost more an imaginary construct?
yeah. Maybe I'm misremembering. I know that at one point I wrote a little essay about the Appalachians, and I remember them being older than bones and older than warm blood. And I thought the moon was in there too, because yeah, at some point the Earth is what, six point something billion, and at some point there was like a huge impact.
Well, and there are some people who say that the moon is just a hollow space station for various types of aliens, the lizard people or whoever. And if you throw
Love
rocks at
that.
it resonates and rings because it's hollow on the inside. And people say all sorts of things about the moon, right? So I don't see why, in one's imagination, too, one couldn't have a mountain range. that's older than the moon. But
It's funny. I sometimes love those age comparisons,
yeah,
like sharks being older than trees was one
right,
that I latched onto for a while. Or, in Halloween, I would post something like,
right.
tentacles are older than leaves. So, sweet dreams.
It seems, and what I'm pulling up on Google now is it seems to be telling me that the Earth and the Moon are about 4.5 billion years old, and that the Appalachians are 400, but 480 million is still pretty old. I mean, it's older
Yeah.
than, I mean, if the Cretaceous period of the dinosaurs is what, 60 million? And then you're going back,
Yeah.
you're going back. And what's interesting too is I think that there comes a point where these things are almost moot, because
Mm,
in our experience, like from my mind, if one believes that the moon is a god or a goddess, or if the moon is an alien space station, or the moon is, younger than a mountain range. These things are, I think we're allowed to have mythologies, and
mm,
it'd be very interesting, wouldn't it, if I was interviewing now somebody who was, from a culture that believed that the moon was a goddess. And I said, well, that's rubbish, because it's like someone might say, well, Rupert, you're racist, because that's their belief.
mm,
So I totally actually get that belief systems are really important, and that they're also true. I think they're all true to a certain degree, and I think that's the important thing about writing like yours. Someone say, well, it's fantasy about cryptids,
yeah.
and you can say, yes, yes. And at the same time, this is a product of the modern human brain reinterpreting
Mm,
a mythology of nature as well. And it's also, a metaphor on mental health. And it's also a
yeah.
metaphor on where we are in our relationship with nature right now, and in finding ourselves precariously balanced. And why can
Yeah.
it not be all of these things at once? Why does it have to always be a hard and fast, dry, sort of allopathic, thing? Because I don't believe that's the way the world works, You know what I
Uh,
mean?
yeah. And, I'm so often looking for points of unity, and uh, it's zooming in and zooming out is a thing that I like to do in kind of my own practice in both imagination and mental
Mm,
health, of like, if we zoom out further about me misremembering even the Appalachian Mountain thing, right? It's like, all right, but the rocks of the Appalachian are older than the moon, but the moon is also of those rocks. And like,
indeed.
how far back do we want to go about
Well, right. I mean,
the
that's the thing. If the
arrangements,
moon and the Earth are the same, and the moon was a bit of Earth that broke off or something, well, then
Yeah.
it is of those mountains, and those mountains are of it.
Which I love. I love
Yeah.
kind of looking up at the moon and thinking of it as distant and disconnected, and then taking a moment to think, well, not really. But then you can sort of do that with any aspect of the universe, is the way I often view it,
Mm,
because connectedness has become something of my spirituality in general, that has developed in concert with the mental health practices. We were talking about the novel, but the first writing that really found me an audience was, I would write nature poetry and poetry about mental health, and that built up a surprising social media following for me. And then a lot of people would reach out to me and want to talk about their own mental health struggles, and that led to me writing a book called Something in the Woods Loves You.
that was what I was next going to ask you about.
Yeah. So that really arose out of those conversations, where I was getting a lot of these messages from people who, and sometimes especially men, sent me a kind of message that I recognized myself in, of the sort of hesitance to talk about it. And the idea that I was talking about it, I think they were either directly or indirectly asking me how I got there. But I said to my wife, like, messages on Instagram were not the best context for this conversation. Like, I needed to take these people on a camping trip. Like, we needed to talk about it for days and days.
Mm,
And so I started to talk about it as the long talk. And Leslie, my wife, said, like, all right, well, you know what this is, then this is a book. And I just had a fortuitous moment where the publisher, Timber Press, who does nature books of all stripes, reached out to me and said, hey, we really like your poetry. Have you ever thought about nonfiction? And I could say, well, here's an outline and here's the first 6 chapters. So I was just in this position to accept their offer to take a look. And that book is really my thoughts on my journey of getting a handle on mental health, but it is focused on my relationship with nature locally. The book's divided into 4 seasons, and then each of the seasons has 5 chapters titled after a plant or animal that I have a relationship with. And so each one weaves metaphor between nature and the self and my struggles with mental health. And I was nervous writing that book because I didn't want to tell people I had it all figured out. That sort of wasn't the point. I didn't want to universalize my experience and say this is the way to do it. I I I had one review I really liked that said the book was a me too, not a how to, that
Okay.
that I really appreciated. And it still felt so important to me because I felt so alone and isolated in my own struggles I didn't talk about. So I really wanted to be open and vulnerable and put it out into the world.
So someone who is becoming a nature writer, who's a good friend of mine and has a social media following. She's called Jane Pike. She's New Zealand. She often talks about how when you're going through the landscape and observing the landscape or admiring the landscape, what if the landscape is observing and admiring you? And I think many people, awe is something that's being talked about a lot now, and the healing power of being in that state of awe, where one's own problems melt away in the face of the wonderness of the universe, blah blah blah. The idea, though, of feeling small and sometimes perhaps a bit threatened by being not the top of the food chain, or potentially washed away by that wave or fall off that cliff or whatever, which leads to that awe. I don't think many of us get the message very often that the landscape is really benignly relating to us. But the reality, and she's pointed this out, and I think she's right. This is where I was very interested in your writing and your perspective, was that, well, actually, no, most of the time, what nature is trying to do is keep us alive. Mostly it's trying to provide us with foods, it's providing us with medicines, it's providing us with warmth and shelter, it's providing us with what we need.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that's our gut biome or whether that's the mountain, that's sort of what it's doing. And it does mean that, yeah, sure, sooner or later you're going to return to the mountain and give your bits to the mountain back, and then the mountain's going to reinvent you as an earthworm or a tree or Jarod Anderson. But I liked this idea that something in the woods love you. And the person who turned me on to you, let me tell you about her. So she's this really interesting person who's, I think, going to emerge as a writer soonish, called Leanna Tank. And she's an occupational therapist. She works within the criminal justice system in Michigan with people who've committed some gnarly crimes and they can't be allowed back into society, but they committed these things in moments of psychosis. So they were actually acquitted, but they just can't be allowed, properly back
Sure.
in. And she exists as an interface between those people, and she uses nature. And she turned me on. So there's this bloke, Jarod Anderson, who I find his writings very useful in the work that I do. So you should know, Jarod, that I can report directly to you that at least one person I know is using stuff from Something in the Woods Loves You
Oh, thank
for
you. Thank you
that
for
sort
that.
of work. So it's clearly doing the job it needs to do. I would be grateful if you would read something. I was trying to find on my cell phone just now what she had sent to me, but then I thought, sod it, actually, Jarod should pull up what he wants to read. So could you read us a bit?
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'll give you a choice. Well, no, here I have a thought. This is a thing I sometimes reflect on about this book, where the fear going into it was that as somebody who struggled with depression, I just really didn't want to write, go touch a tree and you'll feel better. At the same
Even though one
time,
often does, actually.
yeah,
Yeah,
right. At
yeah.
the same time, I often touch a tree and feel better. So that's sort of the joke here is that this is a little section about me touching a tree and feeling better.
Okay.
Pardon me while I find it here. All right. So this is from Something in the Woods Loves You. It was a chilly, wet 11 a.m. on a weekday in October. There was nobody at the park. Why would there be? Other people have real jobs. Depression always has a comment. I didn't want to be there, but I was committed to running a small experiment. I wanted to see if it was possible to have a miserable, successful day. Whether I like it or not, all my versions of success require effort. It's one of my old beliefs, and I can bend it but not break it. Human worth is innate. Success means overcoming resistance. It means work. The air was crisp and misty. I trudged through squelching mud, churning red and gold leaves down into the hungry earth. On that walk, I didn't feel happy with either my beliefs about success or the day's experiment, but I asked my legs to move, and they did. One more commonplace miracle. Moment by moment, stubborn step by stubborn step, I reached the shagbark hickory. I reached out to the rough bark. The cold, wet, depressed, and contrary part of my mind wanted to be cynical about the tree and dismissive of its presence. I wanted to mock myself as a cliche, a crunchy new age fake. I wanted to call the day a waste. But that part of me fell silent when my fingers met the tree. Here was 80 feet of hickory, over a century of life, turning dirt and pale Ohio sunlight into food I could eat straight from the ground, into the oxygen I'd been breathing since before I knew what breathing was. There was no ignoring it. I could feel it there, really feel it, alive, electric beneath my aching fingers. An ancient creature, silent and grand beside a crooked little footpath. Family. That hickory stood tall over me, and for a moment it was the only tree in the woods, the only tree in the world, the first tree, the last tree, the concept of a tree. I tried to calculate its value, and in that moment I saw how absurdly useless the word value is when applied to nature, like trying to pin a price tag on rain or sunlight or gravity. I tried to imagine the tree as a human technology, and suddenly I was standing in the presence of an impossible work of science fiction, a solar-powered, self-replicating, carbon-fixing automaton producing oxygen and building materials on a planetary scale. I tried to shift genres, fantasy and magic, and I found I was a small, fleeting pilgrim who walked in the shadow of giants, living off of their size. How much of my own form and evolution was quietly shaped by trees, an opposable limb for climbing, opposable thumb for climbing, shelter and refuge from predators, fuel for cooking, unlocking more nutrients to build larger brains? I know touching a tree does not cure depression. Of course I know that. I also know that on that October day, the hickory didn't need to cure my depression in order to take away its power.
That's good writing.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I've practiced.
It's, that's some good shit. Okay. What I like very much there too, apart from the fact that it's just really good writing, is I like this idea that you don't have to cure things. So I don't know if you've probably haven't read any books that I've written, but the book that I am sort of known for is a book called The Horse Boy, which follows a journey which I did with my autistic son when he was 5 across a chunk of Mongolia on horseback. And I've lived a lot of my life with hunting and gathering people.
Mm.
So I have engaged in a lot of shamanistic stuff because that is what goes on if you spend time with hunting and gathering people. And so it was very natural for me to go look for that. But I never had in my mind that I was looking for a cure. That to my mind, the autism was who my son was and is, and that there were enormous gifts with that. And that's like saying, Jarod, I want you to stop being an American man, or Jarod, I want you to,
Yeah.
I don't know, be something else. But no, you're going to be Jarod. So you don't want to, you're not trying to take someone's personality away, but let's say I'm your friend or your dad, and I see that you're suffering
Mhm.
through some aspect or other, then yeah, I would like to see if I can help ameliorate or assuage that somehow. And so the journey that we were on was about healing, amelioration, assuagement, not about cure. Of
Yeah.
course, what happened was that every single person who interviewed me about that book, I would explain that and say, I am not looking for a cure, and I do not believe you should have a cure for autism, and da da da, no, no, no. And of course, it would always be titled, he went to Mongolia to look for a cure for his son's autism, and
Yeah.
then everyone would shit on me, for saying, you can't say that. Like, well, I never said
Yeah.
that. But
Right.
journalists will say whatever they want to say. I know that because I'm a journalist, and one just accepts that that is the case. But the fact is, there is this difference between healing and cure. And I think it's a
Yeah.
really good one to talk about for a moment there, because you've touched on it twice. Once with this, and the other thing with your cryptids, that the cryptids are not, I think, from what you've described, it's as if they know that, like everything in nature, that there's always a falling out of balance and a coming
Mhm.
back to balance, and a falling out of balance and a coming back to balance. And the falling out of balance is as necessary as the coming back to balance. The horned wolf could not survive if it didn't have prey, right?
Yeah.
Unless there were your orbital kingfisher, unless there was this many mouth shadow, would die out, right? Because that's its food. So we might say, well, thank God for the orbital kingfisher because it's taking away this shit thing. And the orbital kingfisher would say, thank God for the shit thing. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to survive. And both are true.
Yeah, this book I structured, it starts in winter where I was really going into a rough time with depression, but I end in autumn. And part of the point I am making is that depression is not a thing I cure. It's a thing that I understand has cycles and seasons, that my own
Mm.
mind is a part of nature and has cycles and seasons. But reaching for nature metaphors helped me get past my main hurdle, which was shame, the idea that I needed to be cured or fixed.
As you know, if you followed any of my work, I'm an autism dad, and we have a whole career before this podcast in helping people with neurodivergence, either who are professionals in the field. Are you a therapist? Are you a caregiver? Are you a parent? Or are you somebody with neurodivergence? When my son Rowan was diagnosed with autism in 2004, I really didn't know what to do. So I reached out for mentorship, and I found it through an amazing adult autistic woman who's very famous, Dr. Temple Grandin. And she told me what to do. And it's been working so amazingly for the last 20 years that not only is my son basically independent, but we've helped countless thousands of others reach the same goal, working in schools, working at home, working in therapy settings. If you would like to learn this cutting edge neuroscience backed approach, it's called movement method. You can learn it online. You can learn it very, very simply. It's almost laughably simple. The important thing is to begin. Let yourself be mentored as I was by Dr. Grandin and see what results can follow. Go to this website, newtrailslearning.com. Sign up as a gold member. Take the online movement method course. It's in 40 countries. Let us know how it goes for you. We really want to know. We really want to help people like me, people like you out there live their best life, to live free, ride free, see what happens.
And I mean, we could get into the idea that a lot of mental issues have more to do with arbitrary and unwelcoming context we create for people as much as the issue themselves. But the metaphor that I got to through reconnecting with nature, I mean, it sort of goes like this. I instinctually and easily love nature. And so I do not easily and instinctually love myself. And finding the connection between these two things is a way for me to understand that I can turn that instinctual love for what nature is on myself. And I did that with the shame hurdle too. And I'm a poet. I'm a writer, so I work in metaphor, and the metaphor I landed on goes like this. if I planned a picnic and it was canceled by a thunderstorm, I could be disappointed, but I wouldn't be ashamed. Why? All right. Well, the thunderstorm is a known natural thing. We know that I don't steer the clouds. I didn't invite a thunderstorm. So why would I be ashamed if a thunderstorm arrived? Okay. Depression's no different. It's a known natural thing. Nobody invites it. I don't steer those clouds. So if my day is derailed by depression, disappointment, perhaps, but not shame. And I tie that to this Nordic saying I love, which is there is no bad weather, there is just bad clothes.
Mm.
And so if I think of my own emotions, my struggles as brain weather, all right, maybe I can't steer the clouds, but I can change what hard weather gear I have hanging beside the door. I can improve my shelters.
Mm.
So no, I'm not banishing depression from my mind. I can't. But what I can see it as is brain weather, as part of
Brain
the
weather.
same push-pull natural cycles that I see and love and recognize the importance of out in the natural world.
Yeah, well, if one thing I've often thought about that as people's moods, emotions as weather or similar to weather, and we even use those metaphors, right? You've
Mhm.
got a dark cloud over them or something, or he's a sunny
Yeah.
person. Makes complete sense that our endocrine system, which creates our moods, would reflect the nutrition and the ecosystem that creates the endocrine system that creates us in the first place. Why
Yeah.
would it not reflect the thing that creates it? And something which I have been fortunate to discover in the course of spending a lot of time in nature with hunting and gathering people is that what sits, I talked about the shamanic, what sits at the center of any community like that are the healers.
Mm.
And it's really interesting. Why are they there? Because the human in the natural wild state is not top predator, right? So we are halfway up the food chain, but we have this superpower. People talk about us being Homo sapiens sapiens, but that's actually not descriptive of us because the thinking ape, anything with a
Mm.
brain thinks, and lots of things have brains. In fact, some things have many brains. So, but what is this Adam's apple that I've got here that you've got, which is this enlarged larynx through testosterone? The larynx with a speaking ape, with a storytelling ape. That's our thing. So with a strategizing ape, and of course, when we get together in a group and we strategize, we are sort of unbeatable to the point that we're victims of our own success, destroying the planet. But when one sees that at work, what one realizes in that halfway up the food chain existence, which is the reality of, say, living a hunter-gatherer existence in Africa or something, where there's lots of predators out there that will eat you, that if there's fragmentation within the group, everybody will get eaten by the hyenas. So if
Mm.
conflict, internal or external, gets beyond a certain point, then we're all at risk. So therefore, all of the healing stuff is about conflict resolution. And that is naturally who we are, which means that there must always be a conflict to resolve. And indeed, when one is with those cultures, it's about every 10 days, there's some sort of healing ceremony. It doesn't need to be because I fell down and broke my leg or you got bitten by a snake or something. It could be for that. But it could also be just to wash the psychic dirty laundry of the group,
Mm.
to kind of
Mm.
keep us all cool, to make sure we don't all fragment and get eaten by hyenas because we're funky monkeys with funky brains that are quite brilliant, but also fragile. So that mechanism, which is there in our most natural state, is inbuilt. And in our culture, we don't have it. And
Yeah.
we've gone from the predator never being your fellow human because there's so much out there that you got to band together against. To now in our society, having wiped out all those predators, the predator is always and only your fellow human, and that I think drives us insane. So I
Yeah.
think when one is in a position where one says, well, I have depression, or I have a tendency to psychosis, or I have one of these things. I think there's never been a human that hasn't had those things, but now we're in a state of living where those things are no longer able to be addressed in the
Mm.
natural way. And now we have to flounder around. But that's why I think that kind of writing that you're doing is very good because it takes the place to some degree of the shaman and the healer.
I mean, that's part of the hope, right? Is that strategizing a part of, I love to think of writing as a magic that connects mind to mind. Sometimes if I'm struggling to write, I'll go sit in a library where I can see sort of this temple to words where people come for real reasons to have real impact. And so, that was a huge part of why I wanted to tell the story. And I love writing as entertainment, but I do think that, like the brain weather metaphor, if I can explain that well, I've had speaking engagements where somebody had come up to me afterwards and said that they wrote it down and just kept staring at it and thought, like, okay, I feel lighter every time I read this. And it's like, all right, well, that can be the power of that storytelling ape, but only if, I actually bother to write it down and to get it out there. I'm sure you've gotten the same sorts of comments on your story. And it was so scary leaving that academic job, but this just feels like such an amazing calling and an amazing privilege to get to do
How long
this.
ago did you leave the academic job?
Jeez, I feel like it's been like 7 years now,
Okay.
right
Well,
around
that's
there.
not that long. And the
Mm-mm.
reason I ask is for someone with depression, I know very much as a professional writer, it's a scary path
Yeah,
because you're only as good as the last book that you wrote. It
I was
takes
just
a,
talking about this. Yeah,
just the fact, and maybe your last book was successful doesn't mean your next book is, and
yeah.
doesn't mean that your publishers or your agent necessarily think your next book will be, doesn't
It's
mean that
it's.
they'll,
I was just talking about this in terms of, like, things are going well right now, but as you said, I have no control
no.
over the market or the next book or, I don't know, supply and demand, that stuff. And so, yeah, I'm constantly thinking about hedging my bets, and part of that is sort of a mental health thing where, because I feel good right now, that's the time to build support systems. And so,
Mm.
I'm like, who will value these publishing accomplishments? And it makes me think, like, do I need to get an MFA so that I could teach creative writing? Do I need one? Like, I'm constantly looking at these other
And it's
paths
never a
because,
bad idea to add some skills to your hunting kit, right? I
yeah,
mean, as a hunter and
right.
gatherer
Well,
of words and ideas.
that was the thought with, like, the MFA or teaching creative writing, is that there's
Mm.
synergy there because it's not as if I'm going to stop writing ever.
Right.
So neat. It would be fun to be in a creative writing degree program because I would be doing what
So
I would
that
be
you
doing
can then
anyway.
have those stacks of essays to mark of the people who didn't want to write them.
That's the thing, right? It's like,
But
why would I
but
go
paying
back
the
there?
rent is a little bit more less
Well, yeah,
yeah,
my wife kind of teases me about it because she's like, everything's going well, like you're kind of living the dream right now. It's like, yeah, but this isn't a dream that comes with a pension.
exactly.
So it always is
So
tugging at
yeah,
the back
how
of
do
my mind.
you, because I also, like everyone, have my ups and downs mentally and emotionally. And I've definitely gone through times where, the fear.
Mm,
And also, as you know, having had a book that has been successful, I had a book that was successful, and then, but leading up to that, I had lots of books that were not so
yeah,
successful. And there is that thing of when you finally do get something that's successful, and it could be anything. I think anyone who's listening to this or watching this,
yeah,
can put their own professional life into this. Doesn't have to be a book, could be whatever. But when suddenly people are giving you validation in a big way, it's very, very hard not to get attached to that.
yeah,
And in fact, I think you're going to. You can't not. You're only human. And then, of course, life goes on, and it might go from strength to strength, but it's more likely to have cycles and troughs and crests and waves like anyone else's. So this is a particularly challenging field to be in if you're someone who struggles with self-concept, with mental health, with so forth and so forth. You know this, the ups and the downs. So tell me how you navigate that.
Yeah, I have a few answers for this, kind of the meta stuff and then the day-to-day stuff. It took me over a decade to break in and get an agent, like in fiction, for example.
By the way, lads listening, it really does. It takes a while
Yeah.
before someone's back here. Yeah, yeah.
And so Leslie, my wife, she was in the same boat. We were both sending novels out to different agents. And so the thing we would say to each other when we got really frustrated, the kind of running joke was, what are you going to do? Stop? Because we had always loved telling stories. And so uh, my advice to writers who feel like they're banging their head against it right now, and the thing that worked for me as somebody with depression was process goals over outcome goals, which can feel a little fuzzy, but I mean it in this way. Like, I never controlled if an agent liked a query or if I sold a story or a poem or whatever. I didn't control that. So that would be an outcome goal. Process goal, I could control, I'm going to do 6 queries this month, or I'm going to send out this many stories or poems, or I'm going to write this many words, a week. Process goals, keeping in mind that I like this, I know it gives me energy, focusing on that in the process, and then letting all that other stuff be on the back burner was really helpful to me for that long span where I couldn't find an audience and I couldn't get a foothold in any kind of traditional publishing. And then, as somebody who has serious ups and downs with depression, then the challenge is, how do you write a book? You're not going to write a book because you have a good week.
Mm.
It's a marathon.
Yeah, and often your best writing actually doesn't come in those times.
No, no.
Comes at your
And
times of most vulnerability, often.
I
Yeah.
I also firmly believe that, like, I can't tell. I can't tell until much later what's the good and what's the bad, like for me.
Yeah.
But what I do know is that if I'm not consistent, I lose hold of the pacing. I lose hold of the story I'm telling. And so
Mm.
even on the bad days, I have a sliding scale for that process goal. Like, if I'm in a book, I try to do at least 500 words a day, but I do have an out where I can also do a half hour. But where if I'm in the chair, sort of rereading and planning and writing notes, if nothing comes, I can still call a half hour a victory because I'm still attached to the narrative. I'm still squirming in the chair, and I have to do that because of the way my brain works. Where if I say 2,000 words a day or nothing, I know where that leads for me.
Yeah.
That means like writing becomes touching a hot stove,
Yeah.
and I, I am not a rules guy. Like, that has been a problem for me in the past. Like, I am not motivated by rules, external or internal. So like, I have to find ways to celebrate victories to stay friends with writing. So I really do kind of move the goalposts on what counts as a win.
That's very clever, I think, because I struggle with that too, and sometimes I go through times when I won't write, and I'm asking myself, why aren't you writing? And well, we know the answer is because I'm scared, but the I haven't cracked it, I think, even this far into my career to always get to the computer daily.
Yeah.
And I distract myself because I have other ways that I make a living and other very pressing things that I do. So particularly, work with autism and things like that. So, I can definitely kid myself that I'm doing such necessary work over here, and it is necessary that I can kind of ignore the call to write. And then I know that if I do that for long enough, it will punish me emotionally, mentally, and so on. So it's
I think
amazing
it's
if you can bend the rules like that. But do you ever actually fuck up to the point where you look up and you say, actually, fuck, two two months just went by there, 3 months just went by there, and I didn't actually do anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Phew, I'm
At
reassured.
at 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 this age, like, now sort of deep into my 40s here now. At least what I have though is the track record of thinking, yeah, this happens. I come
Right.
back to it. Like
And I probably will get there.
it's also, there comes a point where it's part of the furniture. It's part of the identity. Where I think that's part of why it feels so bad when it's not happening or when you have a bad month or two or three. Is it's like, all right, well, writing is who I am, and I'm letting who I am down
Yeah.
in some way that's more painful than not folding the laundry. But again, like I try to come back to the like seasons and cycles thing that I firmly believe, but I don't want to lie to you and say that I always feel it. It's funny having written this book. Sometimes I have to crack it open and remember my own viewpoint on things. You know what I
That's
mean?
interesting. Yeah, I do.
Because
Because one
baked
also
into what,
forgets what one
yeah,
writes. Yeah.
yes, and baked into being a human being is knowing
Yeah.
things and forgetting them and relearning them and knowing a thing
Absolutely.
and failing anyway, or having good advice for yourself and not taking it. I mean, the best thing I could say about it is it's all just such a natural and inevitable part of the process that you try to shrug at it a little bit, even though it's painful sometimes.
Let's go now to the other side of the scale. So when you are on that successful wave and one's self-concept gets tied up with I am now a successful author,
Mm,
and therefore, you know, it's like a football game. I've scored a touchdown. Now I've got to keep scoring touchdowns, and you know that inevitably, you may or you may not, but you may well score quite a few more touchdowns, but you
yeah.
will also not score quite a few more touchdowns. And anyone looking from the outside says, well, that's perfectly fine. That's just normal. But of
Mm.
course, from the inside, it's much trickier. Now that you've become successful, how do you navigate that? Because that's another tricky one for mental health.
Yeah. I was listening to writer V.E. Schwab's podcast. I think it's called No Right Way. And they were having a conversation about this. And the conversation was, if your book does well, you need another book. And if your book doesn't do well, you need another book. Like, ugh, true,
It's
but
so true.
how
It's so true.
brutal to hear it said
That
that
is
way.
brutal. Yeah. And the
Yeah,
problem with books is you got to write the bastards.
it takes a long time.
Oh, it takes forever.
Yeah, I find that I have to do this serious compartmentalization, right? Where like I'm very interested. Here's one compartment, and I'm very deeply interested in this book I'm doing and this idea, and it's my whole world. But I have to keep it in its compartment because maybe it'll do well, maybe it won't. I'm gonna read brutal 1-star reviews for it. I'm gonna read 5-star reviews for it, but I'm those aren't the ones that I'm gonna remember.
Exactly.
And so it's like, all right, here's this thing that was my whole world, still is in a way. It's in this compartment, and I have to say to myself, in some level, the reception of it is none of my business. Be-
Yes.
because like I believe that art is a funny thing where like I've done my part. And now whatever art is happens in this space between the thing itself and the person interpreting it. And somewhere in that interaction, that space between those two molecules, the electrical bond, like that's where the art is happening. And all I can do is provide my one molecule. And then, you know, I've done what I can, and I try to say to myself, if the book has found its people at all, mission accomplished. Maybe the book let somebody write a mean review and they really enjoyed that. Like I try to be shruggy about
Yeah.
it. But again, as we've been talking about, then there's the financial component and the career component
Yeah.
and
The
all of
feeding
that.
your kid component.
Yeah, all that stuff's terrifying.
Yeah.
And the only thing I can do there is think of it as terrifying in the same way getting hit by a meteor is terrifying. Like, it's so far outside my control. I try to say to that fear, like,
Mm.
well, I'm going to do the part I can do.
Yeah.
And that's it, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. No, good advice. All right. You said that you had ended that book with autumn coming into winter. So now you've teased us. Now we got to hear it. Can you read that bit, please?
Oh, sure. I can read some of that. Let me find a good spot. I'll tell you, a lot of these chapters have to do with learning something from an animal, right?
Okay.
Or a tree.
Hmm.
And much like the art thing I just said, that meaning is happening between me and the animal. The animal isn't the meaning. It's this idea that that fact and truth are sisters, they're not twins. It's like there's the fact, here's a raccoon, and then the meaning, the truth behind it is something
Mm.
else. It's
Hmm.
related,
Hmm.
but I have a part to play. And so as I am making peace with the idea that depression isn't going to be gone forever, the animal I reached for was the raccoon.
Big fan of raccoons.
Me too. I run into them a fair amount around
You know,
here.
in I just I've been living in Germany for a long time, and raccoons were released into Hessen, which is the part of Germany we're in. And about 100 years ago, now there's raccoons around,
Hmm.
and I get a kick out of the fact that there's raccoons in Germany just being a little bit anarchic there in the woods. And people, oh yeah, they're invasive. Well, maybe, but they're there, and I'm certainly as entertained by them there as I am in North America.
Okay, I think this is a part that's relevant to what we're talking about. Let's try this. I once growled at a raccoon that was approaching my campfire, and he just stood on his hind feet as if to say, if you're feeling froggy, then jump, big guy. I laughed and shared my sandwich. The primary thing raccoons seem to do is thrive. They thrive in human spaces and wild spaces.
Mm.
They are versatile, intelligent, and exude an air of crafty stubbornness. It can be romantic to glean life lessons from herons and hawks and deer leaping through thickets, but there are many seasons in my life when what I really need is the teachings of raccoons. The fall, the fall we retreated from Seattle was one such season. The fall when my recent successes in fighting depression seemed to be slipping away was another one. I imagine these two disappointing autumns transposed, one on top of another. I saw the raccoon pawing at the apartment door in Washington State. I saw the raccoon peering out of my dumpster in Ohio. Both creatures spoke with one mouth, asking an essential question. Who says survival has to be pretty? I didn't want to hear it. I had spent months working with my counselor Mark toward a stable mind, and I felt it slipping away. It hurt. I hurt. It was the old hurt, winter's hurt, the kind of depression that sits on your chest until your ribs ache and your lungs burn, until you just want out. And I go on a little later in this section to picture that raccoon sitting on my kitchen counter, eating Doritos with orange dust all over his face and restating that like you're not in a beauty contest. Like you're struggling with mental illness. You need to change your definition of what success is
Yeah.
because I just had this swell of confidence in my ability to control my own sadness. And when it came back, as it inevitably does, I felt crushed that, oh, no, I have not solved this once and forever. Of course I haven't. And it
Mm.
went back to the way I started that shagbark hickory section of learning to have sad, hard, successful day. And understanding that success is completely subjective
Mm.
in terms of judging my own life circumstances. So, yeah, I could catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror and realize that I hadn't changed out of sweatpants for 24 hours. But, is that a huge failure? Who says? And feeling like I have never cured depression, but wow, I have gotten some great techniques for rejecting shame. And that has taught me that shame was such a big component in the old suffering that I didn't recognize. Because if I can leave aside shame, then suddenly I get to be on my own side. Like before, it was depression seemed against me, and I was also against me because I was judging myself for having depression. So there didn't seem to be a lot of people in my corner inside my own skull. So finding a way past that shame and understanding that there are seasons when I need the raccoon was really a big help to me.
Interestingly, shame, when I have talked to, again, hunters and gatherers,
Hmm.
who are not saints, by the way,
Sure.
they don't deal in shame.
Hmm.
It's so interesting. And it's not that the emotion doesn't come up. It's not like we've invented the emotion of shame since agriculture, but their mechanisms for dealing with it are so useful, in that what they sort of say is, it's almost like they would almost use, I think, a metaphor like you would for with your orbital kingfisher or your horned wolf, that the shame exists almost like a demon, shadow side of ourselves that has a function to a degree, which is to basically show us where we don't want to be, but shouldn't be allowed to get beyond a certain point. And then you bring in your ancestors or your shamanic helpmeet, your horned wolf, your orbital kingfisher, whatever. However, if one wants to get people to do what you want to do, and of course, in hunter-gatherer culture, nobody does that.
Mm.
It's not built into the economy. There's no need for it. In fact, it's counterproductive because it leads to conflict, which leads to fragmentation, which leads to everyone getting eaten by hyenas. But when agriculture comes into the picture, and toil, and going out there and just to plant the crop and to pull that crop out of the, and to deal with the fact that the crop might fail, and actually now you need slaves because it's so, which means you need war and you need that, and well, then shame is a very useful thing. Oh, it's so useful
Yeah.
to get those people to go out and do what they don't want to do for their entire lives.
Yeah.
You need
Eh,
shame, otherwise no one would do it. So here we come along, 10,000 years plus ish after that, inheritors of that, especially, if you're in Ohio, why do people go to Ohio? To be agriculturalists,
mm,
And so you're going to get, huge reinforcement of that. Not surprising that in the absence then of a good medicine man who would have been there at one point but isn't there anymore,
yeah.
but there is the shagbark hickory under which the medicine man would have operated,
Mm.
and that medicine man or woman would have drawn resources from. And we are still the same species as that hunter gatherer. So there's still this innate rebel part of us that knows that shame is a mofo and wants to absolutely look it in the eye and reject it as the demon, as Sauron, as, how does Sauron get you to put the ring on? What does, what's putting the ring on all about? It's about doing the wrong thing. It's about shame, right? And being seduced into doing the wrong thing until you eventually become a shadow of yourself. And then you become the Nazgul who are, consumed by shame. They do actually get to ride around on cool dinosaurs as well and live forever. But apart from that, and
It's
make cool
let me
noises.
let me just say that like
Yeah.
the stubbornness, I locked in on that word when you said it too, because I think that was part of what helped me in
Mm,
understanding that shame has most of its power when we think we have to keep up this silent facade that we are perfect and unquestionable and publicly are beyond reproach. And so like stubbornness and rebellion, like me sharing it all publicly continually is a little bit for me rebellion
mm,
of saying, of giving the middle finger to like that impulse I had for years to stay quiet.
yeah.
And then moving past that fear over and over again, I felt like I get stronger and stronger because I am so open and honest and vulnerable. And then I have people telling me, oh, me too. So then the isolation starts to melt away.
Right.
Um,
Community comes. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Because all of a sudden I don't have some uniquely detestable thing. I have an issue that lots and lots and lots of people have. And as soon as we start talking about it openly,
Common
then,
humanity.
yeah, then what role does shame have?
If you made it this far, into the podcast, then I'm guessing you're somebody that, like me, loves to read books about not just how people have achieved self-actualization, but particularly about the relationship with nature, spirituality, life, the universe, and everything. And I'd like to draw your attention to my books. If you would like to read the story of how we even arrived here, perhaps you'd like to check out the 2 New York Times bestsellers, The Horse Boy and The Long Ride Home, and come on an adventure with us and see what engendered, what started Live Free, Ride Free. And before we go back to the podcast, also check out The Healing Land, which tells the story of my years spent in the Kalahari with the Sun, Bushmen, hunter-gatherer people there, and all that they taught me and mentored me in, and all that I learned. Come on that adventure with me.
Yeah, well, shame gets you to pay your tithes to the church is what it does.
Oh, that too.
Yeah,
That too.
Interestingly, I have a raccoon kitchen story, a really cool real one. I lived in Texas for a long time. We had a cat door. For years and years and years, the cat door was not exploited by raccoons until one day when it was. And you always know when the raccoon has come in because it lands with a particularly heavy thump on the floor that's thump enough to wake you up in the bedroom that is away from the kitchen. And I remember waking up going, I bet that's a raccoon. And going in and finding the raccoon in my kitchen and like looking at him and like I'm standing there starkers and thinking, oh, I really don't corner this animal without a suit of armor on, and sort of suggesting to him a little bit with the broomstick, look, dude, and having him kind of go, no, bummer, all right, fine. But it's not like he ran. And this went on because he was after the cat food. And no matter where I put the cat food or whatever, he always found the cat food or she always found the cat food. And so finally we came up with the idea one day of buying like this really super duper difficult complex Tupperware thing with this big complex Tupperware lock thing on it with the cat food. And sure enough, I hear thump. And then I hear the door, and then I hear the stuff comes out of the cupboard. And I'm like, I wonder if he'd got to open that cat food. I got to know, right? So I go in, and there was this bonding moment between me and the raccoon. The raccoon, he's like there, and he's trying to figure it out. And you can see he's like, got his thumb out and his tongue out, and he looks up at me. And in that moment, it's like he's got any ideas?
Yeah, right.
And I'm like,
don't just stand there, pitch in. Yeah.
The reason I bought that Tupperware was to protect that cat food. But hats off and then you can see him like a bummer. And then he just kind of moves out of the.
Around here,
It was a bonding moment. And there was this part of me that really actually thought, rather like you saying, well, actually, then I just shared my sandwich,
that was a real story. I mean, a raccoon came right up to me at the fire, and I thought to myself, like, should I run this raccoon off? And I'm going to give him half of my sandwich. And he took it, like, with hands. It was such a strange moment. And more than once now around here, I've rescued them from my dumpster outside because they crawl in to look through the trash and then have a moment of, oops, I can't get out. And
isn't it interesting how, particularly in our culture, there is this real kind of, you're not supposed to like raccoons. You're not supposed to tolerate them. You're supposed to wag the finger at them, but they're so charming.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And as you say, also, I think they are a real metaphor for thriving, not just surviving. Like anywhere, they can be anywhere. You'll find raccoons. And one of the things I also love about raccoons is that you can be in the really shite urban environments in the US, and Canada too, and actually Mexico. And you'll always find a raccoon.
Yeah.
And that raccoon will always be doing well. In the UK, we have a very similar thing with foxes. Urban foxes, urban red foxes are a real thing. And you get these people like, oh, I'm like, no, they're reminding us of the wild. Yeah. Like, how amazing that you could have that.
We have urban coyotes on an uptick too. Indeed. Around here now.
Indeed.
Talking about shame and what animals we're allowed to like. I have a chapter about gray squirrels, and the whole metaphor there is, I went to a store that sells bird feeders, and they had half the stuff there was aimed at how to keep gray squirrels away. And, I had this moment of like, wait, why? I love gray squirrels are great. I love seeing them. There's all this birdseed laced with cayenne and all these baffles. And I reached for that as the metaphor of society arbitrarily making any kind of
Well, because
neurodivergence
it's
unwelcome.
it's right. It's the wild animals that can thrive in our controlled environments
Yeah.
that we detest the most because we fear them, I think, because they remind us that the wild is just as you can pave over nature, but then cracks will appear and that forest is going to come back up,
I'm
and
ri-
that we cannot control things.
I'm writing a short book about dandelions right now for the same
Yeah.
publisher that did Something in the Woods Loves You, and it's the same kind of thing of suddenly there's this $1 billion industry of herbicides trying to get rid of dandelions, and why?
Yes.
Why do we hate
And one of
dandelions?
the most nutritious plants on the planet
Yeah. And
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 health
so
giving.
great for pollinate. I mean, the deep tap roots aerate the soil, on and on and on about the values of dandelions. But all of a sudden, because of lawns and this weird 18th century European aristocracy landscaping trend, like now we don't want dandelions. Like monoculture lawns are terrible. They're really broken landscapes.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
I also think we distrust things that are free and things that are abundant. Like, yeah, dandelions are more nutritious than spinach and kale, but they're growing along the roadside and you don't have to pay for them. So we just
We can't
trust that,
attach
I
value
think.
to them. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. We better shame them so that, and they
Too
won't be shamed,
common.
nor will the red
Yeah.
squirrel, nor will the raccoon, nor will the coyote. It's interesting. I've got a great squirrel story, so then I want to hear yours. So I have a couple of stories that are I live in Texas moments.
Hmm.
And one of them was shortly after I moved into rural Texas, I let the battery of my truck run down accidentally. And so I had to try to wave down someone to jumpstart my truck. And I waved down a truck at the bottom of the driveway, and it's this old black dude with his granddaughter, who must be about 21 or so, two loaded shotguns pointing out of the window. They're both drinking beer. And as they pull up, and I'm about to say, thank you for stopping, I've got jump start. Before I can open my mouth, bloke says, got any squirrel? And I'm like, got any squirrel? Got any squirrel? What does that mean? I'm like, oh, do I have any squirrels? I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, in the woods behind the house, I see them. I mean, but I wouldn't say I have one. But
Yeah.
anyway, here's the problem I've got. And I go, so he comes up and he looks at my engine and he criticizes it and he says, oh, your engine is, blah, blah, blah. And he says, where are you from? And I'm like, well, I'm British. And he goes, well, that's in Europe. Yeah. And then because it turns out he was stationed in Europe, during the war, and
Okay.
he's actually traveled a lot and blah, 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 blah. And he's right. My engine is a bit of a shame. But he jump starts me and wishes me good day. And then he and his granddaughter drive off, sipping beer. And I watch them go out of the driveway, and then I see them put the brakes on like that. The two shotguns come out of the window, boom, boom, as they're shooting at the squirrels in my trees below on
Yeah.
the road there. And then they drive off, and that's an I live in Texas moment.
Yeah, that's pretty Texas. Yeah. Nice.
Could you read us your gray squirrel story,
Yeah.
please?
Can do that.
Another will not be shamed animal. I love it.
Now let me find it. You'd think I'd have encyclopedic knowledge of where things are in this book, but
I can't remember anything that I
that's
write.
just
So.
not how my brain works.
Also, love to think about long format podcasts. Is it doesn't matter. You could take 10 minutes to find it. We'd
Oh,
have
I
to
love
think
it.
anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. This is my strange squirrel story here. I went to school for my master's in Athens, Ohio, which is this hilly town. It's in Appalachia. Ohio is interesting. 2/3 of it flat cornfields, and that's where the glacier came down and stopped. But where the glacier stopped, that's where what is officially Appalachia in the US begins. And so a third, sort of southern and eastern counties of woods of Ohio are steep hills and woods. And that's not what people picture for
And
Ohio.
stunningly beautiful, by the way.
Oh,
Yeah,
I love it. Yeah.
yeah.
And so that's where I went to university. In my memories of Athens, Ohio, the brick streets are always wet with rain. It's an unseasonably warm winter day that smells like overripe autumn. The sycamores gleam like bleached bones, jutting from the hilltops, bright and distinct among the sober university halls, ochre, tan, bronze, and weathered concrete. On one such day, the one endless day of my Athens memories, I was walking to my English department office in Ellis Hall when I noticed a line of halted traffic. I couldn't see why they had stopped until I reached the front car. I made eye contact with the driver. She looked to the road, and I followed her gaze. There on the wet bricks was a gray squirrel, tail down, limbs tucked inward, seemingly awake and aware, but stone still. The driver gave me a micro shrug and continued to wait for the squirrel to do whatever it would do. Somewhere down the line of cars, a horn blasted. An angry voice rose and fell. On impulse, I did something foolish. I walked up to the squirrel. She didn't move. I reached down and laid a hand on the squirrel's back. She was warm and her heartbeat drummed against my fingertips. She still didn't move. I scooped her up with two hands and carried her out of the street. In the years since that day, I have been acquainted with wildlife rehabbers who have puckered scars from squirrel bites, but I had no such experience then. Behind me, I heard the traffic resume, tires muttering on slick brick. The squirrel was a soft furnace, vibrating like a tiny engine. I considered what I knew about tending to injured wildlife, which was nothing at all. The road, University Terrace, was cut into the hilltop, hemmed in by sidewalks and a low stone wall, beyond which was a vast lawn. I don't recall anyone commenting on my actions, but Athens is an odd place, a small Appalachian college town where a man carrying a squirrel might not rate a second look. I placed the squirrel carefully in the grass and expected to spend the next few minutes as an uncomfortable witness to the small creature's final moments, standing sentinel as whatever injury that had stilled her body finished taking hold. I withdrew my hands and stood. The moment I did, the squirrel rose and raced off toward the nearest tree, a sprint and a leap, her plane of motion shifting from horizontal to vertical as she skittered up the trunk, then vanished behind thick boughs. I wondered at her experience of events, imagining her perspective, the fear in the road, the inscrutable cars, the touch of human skin, the return to grass and a frantic moment of escape, a rush, an arc through the air, the flat winter-sparse horizon transitioning to a branching highway stretching up toward a limitless sky. I don't know if the squirrel had fallen and was momentarily stunned. I don't know if she visited the road to lick salt and lost consciousness due to some unguessable malady. All I know is that the change in position, brick to grass, a return to a familiar context, unlocked whatever mechanism had held the creature motionless. We understand the world through stories. The stories we hear of others, role models and cautionary tales, the stories we tell about ourselves to ourselves, the constantly unfolding saga of identity. But what of the squirrels? They clearly function just fine in a world without human narrative. Is it possible for us to step outside our own stories and imagine their worldview? So that story and placing it in the grass, unlocking it, is kind of the beginning of me getting to the metaphor of sometimes the context is really what is important, and it can often be invisible. This idea that our identities are built of stories, our understanding of the world is built of stories. And at a very young age, we're handed a lot of stories that we internalize, and those become like our fundamental building blocks of reality. And so seeing those stories and understanding that as storytellers, we have a role to play in shaping and reshaping them is such a key part of what I want to tell people about mental illness.
It's really interesting when one encounters these things in nature that seem to go against the physics of what should happen. Like when a squirrel not only sits there motionless and lets you pick it up, but then also doesn't panic and bite you,
Yeah.
but then seems to return to its immediate health and go, what on earth is going on? And you have to walk away and say, I just don't know.
Hmm.
But I'm so grateful I had that experience.
Yeah.
And I think experiences like that in nature, those kinds of ordinary miracles, but nonetheless, when you tell anyone that story, they're like, whoa, no way. Because all of our understanding, all of our story around squirrels is not that.
Yeah.
Means that somehow something went on that allowed you to have that experience and then relate that experience in a healing context. As you say, the context is always is often invisible. I like that. That I think a lot of things happen for healing, and we can't see it frequently at the time. Serendipity, I think, comes into that. I'm often intrigued by why do animals and plants and rocks seem to sometimes see what we need
Mm.
and generously offer it across species. Why do you think that is?
I think honestly the question is the thing that we have to interrogate, because that idea that we internalize all these early stories, I think one of the big ones is this idea that we're visitors to nature, that we're like
Right.
aliens coming and visiting and tending and controlling, which is, nonsense. It's manifestly untrue. Like every breath we take is a call and response with phytoplankton and the
Mm,
nations of forests. We're only alive because we are fundamentally, intrinsically part of nature. So why shouldn't it be there as family for us
mm.
and be reaching toward us anytime we reach for it? I mean, sometimes I find that just the intention of going to nature, and that could be the woods, it could be looking into the sky, it could be finding a patch of lichen on a sidewalk, but going with the intent of connecting with the broader world and sort of the wholeness of the life around us, and that's part of our story and part of us. Just that intent is, I think, where you find that nature is reaching back to help
Right.
give us what we
We
need.
have to do the outreach.
Yes.
Yes, if we reach out, it will reach back.
And it can be imagination, it can be physically going to nature. Often it's both for me.
Mm.
But I find I do different kinds of reaching for different days. Like there are days where I need movement, and I will go and I will do 3 miles in the woods pretty fast. And the movement and the trees and scanning my environment is what feels healing to me. And there are other days where I walk until I can't see a parking lot or a car, or, I can't see anything but trees. And I just sit. I sit at the base of an oak tree, very still, and just let the scene unfold. And there's nothing stagnant or stationary about it. As I sit, all sorts of different animals come and visit. I see different things. I hear different things. It's a completely different experience than when I'm trying to put miles behind me. And it can be the same location, but those are very different experiences that fill different needs for me. So what we take with us is what I'm saying is so important.
I also like the fact that you say it's all right to go into nature in these different moods. Frequently we're told we must go in there to be still, or we must go in there to forage, or we must go in, and the truth is we must go in there to do all these things, and no one is better than the other, because nature is where we live. It's planet Earth. We might have forgotten that, but outside
Yes.
the walls of the apartment that we're living in, actually, it's the same as it ever was. These ideas, storytelling can be as negative as it's positive. As you know, shame is a story. So your orbital kingfisher hunting out the shame, perhaps, and I'm projecting my own story onto your orbital kingfisher because I'm deciding that I like the fact that it's hunting out shame because that makes me feel healed in some way. It may at all not be what your idea of it was, but that's the lovely thing about stories. We can project ourselves, into and through story. But the fact is, it is a story. And, animals presumably must be living their own stories too, and having stories, and trees must be having stories. Because we cannot be, if things are, if it's a conscious universe, if it's interlocking fields, if the quantum state of reality is what physicists are now beginning to agree upon, then how can we be the only storytellers out there? We can't. It's
Yeah.
just that, so did your squirrel have a story? And the other thing I like about your squirrel story is that what really stands out to me naturally, of course, is the squirrel's behavior and the enigma of that. But also the lady in the car who was willing to stop and wait, knowing that all those people behind her, eventually someone will probably get out and probably give her a hard time. But she was going to not run over that squirrel. And she also wasn't going to get out of her car and try to chase the squirrel off. There was something in her that was saying, it's worth instinctively in this moment to give this squirrel the space, even though I'm going to be shamed by the
Yeah.
people behind me. And then also something that instinctively in you said, this is the moment to take that story to its next chapter. That lady stopping the car, you picking the squirrel up, the squirrel not biting you, again, just makes me think about how loving nature is. This idea that you say something in the woods loves you. And we are the same. We are a very loving species. Not everyone automatically tries to run the squirrel over or chase it off. Not everybody instinctively thinks, well, I can't pick that squirrel up because it might mess me up. And it might.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe your gut in that moment, for whatever, so there are the animals living this, there's nature living its stories in relation to us. And there's those three, you, the squirrel, the lady, are all behaving in a very loving manner.
Yeah.
And that seems to me the basic energy of nature, is that it is love.
To go on a complete tangent here, but it's related in my mind. That's a thing I'm often thinking about in terms of modernity and social media that worries me, because I mean, what's the opposite of the idea that there's sort of an internal loving mindset to reality? Well, social media. And a lot of people seem to be living inside these virtual non-spaces as if it's their real environment these days. And I don't think everyone really understands the fact that it's not a natural environment. Like the algorithms, we have science that show that it steers you toward posts, engagements meant to trigger kind of fear, anxiety, anger, because those capture your attention and keep you scrolling. And so we have these evolved brains that, walk the path, scan for threats, and then we have these marketing engineers who have found a way to kind of hack that. And all right, we'll give you a thread every 3 steps. And then,
Gonna keep your attention. Yeah.
yeah, and we find ourselves living in this space, and I feel like it's really doing some damage to the idea you were saying, that nature is loving, that the world is loving, that there's something intrinsically loving to the universe. Well, there are a lot of people who are living through their screens and thinking that it's a window. It's not a window. It's not showing you reality. It's showing you a very specifically crafted kind of experience that is telling you that you live in a world of threat and danger and outrage. And that's not to say that, a lot of the issues aren't real or manufactured, but it's the concentration and intensity of the way you get them presented when you're living through screens instead of walking a landscape. And it really worries me kind of about the general outlook I see in the zeitgeist about what nature is, what the world is, what our role is in nature. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I got I've gotten messages before from people who just see humanity as a cancer and that it's a mistake and that
Sure.
we're a
Well, we'd
failed
be
business.
behaving like that way a bit, wouldn't
Yeah,
we?
and
So,
and
yeah, yeah.
certainly, the threats and the harms are real, but the idea that there is no positive interaction between human beings and nature, that the best thing you can do is stay away or not exist. And that's kind of heartbreaking as someone who feels like we're intrinsic parts of nature, that we're animals on this planet.
Well, also somebody who's you're wearing the mental health thing on your sleeve, that that's letting the shame story win, right?
Right.
And
You don't
it's just
have
not
shame,
true.
you are shame. Yeah, it's
Indeed,
brutal.
indeed, we are shame, all of us. But the what I would say to that, because I'm an eternal optimist, is while it is true that people have replaced sex cells with fear cells, with anger cells, and that
Right.
is kind of been the progression of the social media evolution. What is also true in those algorithms is people are going to find your book and they're going to find this conversation through an algorithm. And they're going to find a conversation about why shame is actually a construct through an algorithm. And they're going to find a conversation about why we are a loving species
Yeah.
and nature is essentially benign, I think, through an algorithm. So no matter how much social media tries to do that, or the architects who are perhaps not such great actors who are controlling it,
Yeah.
even they can't control the natural mycelium type growth of the whole thing to say, yeah, but Rue and Jarod are going to kind of come together through Rue's mate Leanna, who's doing this work for in the penitentiaries or whatever, the lockdowns in Michigan and da 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 da. And well, that's going to come through an algorithm too. So I wouldn't have found you
Yeah. It's a
had
good
it
point.
not
I
been,
I live on a little one-way street next to a cemetery in a town that isn't very big. So yeah, I'm having a lovely conversation with a writer in Spain right now, and there's no reason that would be happening if not
right. We're
for
doing
the
this through because
technology.
this will go through YouTube and
Yeah.
Apple something or other and all those other portals that people find these
Yeah.
conversations.
The
So yeah,
connection is real. I just sometimes worry about in terms of intentionality and
admittedly we're a couple of old
context.
buggers, but yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah, but the intentionality and context and just kind of being aware of storytelling animals. We understand the world and our place in it through
Mm,
stories, but there are so many people there ready to hand you a pre-made story and without your participation, and just being a little bit aware of that and what impact it has on you is a huge, just a vital task for all of us, because a lot of people will hand you stories that have nothing to do with serving you or your happiness.
certainly, certainly. And we've had that since we've had, cautionary fairy tales and scaring each other around the fires at night.
Homilies.
Right. Now, some of those things are actually designed to keep you alive, but also you can just tell them because they're scary just for the sake of scare.
Yeah.
The thing about, one could say, well, all you need to do in order to rebel against that is go for a walk in the woods. And then I thought, yeah, but what if you can't reach the woods? And
Mm.
I had this writing student who was a little girl from South Korea who came to us in Germany to our stable. And she was passionate about horses. Had her between the ages of 8 and 10. And she was one of the sweetest human beings I've ever come across, to the point that people in my team, we'd almost fight for who got to go with Suji that day. We'd be like, no, you had
Nice.
her last week. Because just being in her presence was really healing. She was just one of those people that carried that light. And she knew she was going to have to go back to Seoul. And that when she got back to Seoul, there would be no horses and
Mm.
there would be no German forest. And when the week came approaching, her having to go back, I was thinking, what can I do? What can I do? And I thought, what I need to do is implant this experience of riding in the German forest in her psyche in a way that she feels she can call upon it anytime. So we made these rides, meditations into imagining herself in an apartment in Seoul, imagining this ride, and then imagining where the ride would lead, and watching herself grow up and making money, and then being able to buy horses, and then being able to buy a place in the forest, and being able to find a partner that liked horses and live that life, and da 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 da. And she then really ran with this and began to construct her own stories as we rode. And that
Love that.
occasionally, of course, she did go back to Seoul, and exactly what she feared happened would happen. It would happen, happened. But she does write me from time to time and say, I follow those stories, and I know that those stories will lead me to back to a horse in a forest. I think the work that you're doing, where you say, okay, let's say you can't get into nature, but you can imagine it, and maybe you don't know, maybe you're not a naturalist, you're not a budding David Attenborough, so you don't know what tree it is or what bird it is, and okay, then there's the shame of not knowing. Or
Mm.
you can imagine something completely different, like your horned wolf or your orbital kingfisher. And if I've been at the trance fires with the Sun Bushman healers, and they describe to me the entities that they encounter when they're in the spirit world, many of them are not dissimilar from the orbital kingfisher and the many-mouthed shadow and the horned wolf. You know, we
Love
are
it.
the species that we are. We're going to come up with these metaphors, you know, no matter where we are, because nature's in us and we are nature and so on. But one of the things I love about your work is that for people who are in that situation, whether they're like my friend Leanna's people who are perhaps not able to access nature despite living in the middle of Michigan, unless she takes them out in it, or it's my friend Suji there in Seoul, or even just someone who is in nature but just so locked in their head through depression that they can't feel they can access the loving side of it. I think that those works of imagination bring imagination and nature together, which is a shamanic experience as old as humanity itself, but
Mm.
must be reinvented and reinterpreted for every generation. You're doing that work.
Thank you. I
It's
think it's.
you're doing healing work. Yeah.
Can I read a poem or two
I was rather
related to this
hoping you might.
topic?
Yes.
All right, you made me think of a poem here. That
Okay.
this is a poem called Orcas, which I do not have in Ohio. Somewhere there are orcas. I'm in my little gray house in Ohio, surrounded by the stale air of winter indoors. But somewhere there are orcas. It's an easy fact to forget. It's easy to shrink your world to what you can see. But thankfully, somewhere there are orcas. Sometimes my world is all sun-faded plastic, scrawled along the roadside in a scribble of petty meanness. But somewhere there are orcas. We all know facts that are as inert as chalk dust, but some knowledge is medicine. So I I never see orcas, but they can still be medicine for me. And sometimes I reach for the fantastical and imagination, and sometimes I reach for just literal facts. And sometimes it's animals, and sometimes it's a concept. Let me drop one short poem on you that is a concept in nature poem that I love. This one's called Naming the River. The water in your body is just visiting. It was a thunderstorm a week ago. It will be an ocean soon enough. Most of your cells come and go like morning dew. We are more weather pattern than stone monument. Sunlight on mist, summer lightning. Your choices outweigh your substance. Like, I'm constantly ruminating on what just the bare facts of my physical reality are, and then taking those and running them through a filter or a lens of my imagination, taking my sense of wonder and connection, and then letting that interpret these bare facts for me. And even when I can't get out of the house, sometimes that's all I need to feel that connection to nature, which is funny because sometimes it feels like a leap of faith. In other times, I think to myself, well, all I'm doing is looking at sort of bare, uncontestable facts,
Mm.
like the water cycle or orcas exist. And I have a 6-year-old son who sometimes reminds me of this process just through his questions. I mean, he came up to me once and asked me if electric eels were real. And I thought, wow, what a reasonable question. And what a bizarre answer I have for you. Yes. And I've
And
seen him.
thank heavens that my answer is the bizarre one.
Yeah. But I mean, so much of the bare facts of our world are bizarre. It's just that it can fade from your mind and from your awareness through
Yeah.
familiarity. But I've seen my son shake with excitement about a bumblebee,
Yeah.
and if you think let's use our imaginations and think we've been traveling through space for 1,000 years, and you're in a vacuum, and you're in a clean white lined spaceship, traveling, and you encounter a bumblebee. What a singular, fascinating, alien, amazing, mind-blowing thing.
Yeah.
And we can take for granted that I see him bouncing around the forest floor in May, but I try not to let that familiarity rob me. I mean, I said lichen on a sidewalk earlier. If you don't know, look into what lichen is. Like, lichen is two animals living together. It's a garden and it's a gardener. It's a shepherd and it's a herd. And it's hard to tell which is which when you're looking at the photosynthesizing organism and the fungi. And like, lichen is fascinating. And I kind of defy you to show me a place where you can't find it outside of, the permafrost. You can find lichen. It's just reaching for the wonder. If you really reach sincerely for wonder and you come to it as a student, I think you will find it reaching back.
If you reach for wonder and you come at it as a student, you will find it reaching back. Have you written that down?
No,
I think you
I
should
should,
write
huh?
that down.
I have a.
But I want 50%. No, I mean
Yeah.
80. Sorry, as your agent.
Thank you for your writer brain pointing out that I should.
Yes, write it down quickly. That is very good.
I mean, the student part is important, right?
It
Like, I
is,
think
because it's humility.
yeah, and the times I've felt most stuck and trapped and stagnant in my life is when I let my ego get out in front.
Yeah.
And like, I've figured it all out and it sucks.
Well, because figuring it all out would suck,
Yeah.
wouldn't it?
And is impossible. Like, I sometimes look out my window here and I can see a blue spruce tree. And if I dedicated my entire life to just being a student of that one tree,
Yeah.
I don't know that I ever stopped being a neophyte, a newcomer into what that tree is and does and feels and how it's connected with a host of microorganisms in the soil and on and on and on. And that's just one tree I can see. Like, the world is amazing and full of limitless opportunities to be amazed.
Yes,
but she's not going to kick down your door. You do have to go, or just open yourself up and invite it in.
Yes. Listen, we are at the 2-hour mark. I would like you to come back on this show.
Great.
And talk about some specific things about some of the themes that we've touched on, particularly somewhere there are orcas. Because, this idea that the fact that it exists beyond your sight can give you fact. Like, people say, well, prove to me that God exists because you can't see him. That's a really nice analogy. It's like, well, I can't see orcas, but I know they're there.
Yeah.
Okay, I haven't seen a documentary with David Attenborough about God with pictures of God, leaping through the Arctic Ocean, unless the orcas are God. And then
I think I'd rather have Steve Irwin on that one. I don't know.
So I think people are going to, find. You have a website, right? Tell us the website.
I do. It's jarodkanderson.com, or you can find me anywhere on social media as Jarod K. Anderson or the Crypto Naturalist.
And is the Crypto Naturalist still going, the podcast?
It's on hiatus, but there are, I think, 70 episodes up.
Right.
And
so
you
there's
can kind
plenty
of start
for people
anywhere
to get their teeth into that.
Yeah. And now the book I have coming out in February is sort of a capstone to that whole series. So
Tell us again the name of the book.
it's called Strange Animals, and it comes out February 10th.
Ballantine Books.
Yeah, which I was really warmed by them buying it because my copy of The Hobbit was from Ballantine. They're sort of an old classic fantasy publisher, so there were maybe a
Fantastic.
few tears when they decided to publish that novel.
I'm going to ask you to leave us with one more poem.
Absolutely. Choices. All right, I think I have an appropriate one for us here. This one's called Woodland U. It's easy to look at the contours of a forest and feel a bone-deep love for nature. It's less easy to remember that the contours of your own body represent the exact same nature. The pathways of your mind, your dreams, dark and strange as sprouts curling beneath a flat rock. Your regret, bitter as the citrus rot of old cut grass. It's the same as the nature you make time to love, that you practice loving. The forest, the meadow, the sweeping arm of a galaxy. You are as natural as any postcard landscape and deserve the same love.
I'm very glad that my friend Leanna turned me on to you, and I'm very glad that other
you.
listeners asked me to have you on. Would
Well,
you come back?
thank you. I'd love to. Yeah, I would love to. You might have gotten the sense I could talk about these things forever. So I had no idea that was 2 hours if you
We
hadn't said
enjoy it. Well, that's the lovely thing about these long format. I love the fact that one has the freedom to explore like this. Is it was always something which I always found rather stressful. When people interview you, and you got to be interviewed, plug the book, blah
yeah.
blah blah, and they you've got 15 minutes, or you've got 8 minutes, or you've got 3 minutes, or you've got.
Yeah.
It's what I love about podcasts, and maybe this is one of the nice things about social media now.
Yeah.
Is actually you can just let it unfold naturally, because people are just going to listen to it in chunks.
Yeah, I never like a podcast and wish it was shorter. I don't understand the mindset of
unless it just happens to be a great short conversation, then sure, brilliant.
Yeah.
But yes, to say, well, this is a 20-minute format.
Yeah, it's me thinking of shows I know where they cut the interview off because they're reaching the 30-minute mark or something. It's like, why? It's a podcast. It's not like you're in the way of the next show. Like, just keep going.
It's because the podcaster has to go change the nappy on his kid or something.
Well, that could be. That could be. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been so lovely, and I'm excited
really
to talk to you again.
I'm really grateful for this. It was brilliant. I'm gonna go feed ponies.
All right. I'm going to try to get some words written. Wish me luck.
Now I'm feeling shamed. So I better go. But it's not your fault. But it's inspiration. I need to work a bit more on my book.
I'm up against the Dandelion book is due in January. So,
but we love a good deadline. I love a good deadline.
We do. I both hate them and recognize their value, and so
we need them.
Yeah, I keep jumping into them because I know it's how I get
nature again. You're not going to go hunt and lay down the meat for winter and the firewood unless winter's coming.
Yeah. It's one grateful things I am too about being in traditional publishing, because I self-publish the poetry collections, and the traditional gives me deadlines. So,
indeed.
And all right. Thank you, Rue.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Cheers, man. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. If you did, please help us to make more. Please like, subscribe, tell a friend, give us a thumbs up. If you'd like to support us on Patreon, please go to my website, rupertisaacson.com. And if you'd like to find out about our certification courses with autism, education, horsemanship, everyday shamanism, there's a whole range of cool stuff. Putting a show together like this is not an easy task. If you'd like to support us, please consider going to our Patreon page and showing us some love there. Even the smallest donation, it really helps us to keep the good content coming. So go to rupertisaacson.com and click on the Patreon link. not to mention our excellent merch, please go to our shop and check out some of our really cool rock and roll themed merch, t-shirts, hoodies, all that sort of thing. RupertIsaacson.com, it's all there. I can't wait for our next guest and also to meet you there. In the meantime, remember, live free, ride free.